like people working from home and technology and some of the other jobs that people can do remotely, and some of the other things that some of the jobs that required face-to-face contact or in-person services are going to be the ones that are going to be impacted the most, I think.
Well, that's one of the questions I guess Brian has to answer too then. If we're going to be finding the workforce changes so dramatically, these people need to be trained, retrained, and trained in different ways, because the workforce is going to require different types of people to do types of jobs. So Brian, I know as part of the education process you work with is trying to figure out how we're going to educate these new workers and retrain the older workers.
Sure.
I guess, what do you expect? I mean, the job changes that we're seeing, I'm just thinking about robotics and things like that is going to be changing dramatically. What Kevin mentions about the in-service type people, I mean, do you need less waitresses because the tables are further apart? Do you need more people in warehouses? But the issues about warehouses also means distribution networks, all kinds of changes. One little question I think about, of course, is when we finally get a vaccine, it has to be kept so cold. There's going to be construction of refrigerators and freezers throughout the entire country that has to be made. That's a workforce change. People are not trained in that type of job. So.
Yeah, I think that the nature of what people do across all sectors is going to change, and so that's one thing that we are starting to see already in the fields where people are coming back to work, but also in the fields where people have not yet undergone the same type of contraction in their organizational settings. So I think that we're going to see across all sectors a need to shift the way that people think about their jobs, and therefore a change in the way that people are approaching what training and development looks like. There are models that have been popularized in some of the formal educational settings over the last few years, mostly in medical training, in legal training, that are more focused on competency and skill than they are on job role and function, and more focused on competency than they are on competency and outcome than they are on learning process. And I think that you're going to see a rise in training and development efforts that are more oriented in that fashion, so that people are tasked with earning what we call a micro-credential or a badge in a particular skill that is going to make them able to perform their role functions, rather than in earning a degree or attending a particular number of continuing education credits. Things that we've put a premium on in the past are likely not going to serve the needs of organizations moving forward. And so we're going to have to decouple the role from the skill, and make sure that people are being upskilled in the particular types of job functions that they're going to need to be performing as they move forward.
Well, won't that be a little bit easier, I think, perhaps, when you see the demographic changes between boomers and millennials? My generation, of course, was trained more generalist and liberal type education to be site-specific to nothing, okay? And so I'm assuming COVID is going to accelerate some retirements that may not have been here before, or at least permanently leaving the workforce. So the millennials might be in better shape to do these kinds of functions because they're trained in much more site-specific type skills with their technical stuff. Is that a comment that's accurate, or am I just maybe thinking that's what it should be?
I think it's possible. I don't know necessarily that it is going to conform with the way that millennials have typically approached job satisfaction, and which is a much more holistic approach to understanding an organization and understanding what role they serve. If people are taking the approach that, well, that's not in my job description and therefore I'm not going to do it, or that does not serve me and therefore I'm not going to do it, I think they're going to find themselves engineered out of work processes and engineered out of jobs. And so there needs to be a greater appreciation for what the organization does, in a way that probably does skew more towards the boomer mentality or the Gen X mentality. And I think it's going to be a transformation for everybody. So I don't know that there's necessarily one generation that's better positioned than any other.
Well, Kevin, you work with a lot of the undertrained, I guess you would say.
Right.
People who are really need special training for different things. And I guess those are the challenges they face because some of their jobs may not be coming back.
Right.
They have to be trained in a different way than they ever were trained before. So, I mean, I know that's one of the workforce development's biggest thing is the education or re-education of some of these jobs. How much can you do and how much can you work with if those jobs aren't even going to be there?
Right. Well, I think there's a couple things that we're looking at to do differently. One of them is, our current model, and this is really generated by federal law, previous federal law, which says an individual looking for training can come into our job center and we pay for that person to go to training. And so we're doing these one-off training contracts, which are called individual training accounts. I think now we have the opportunity to go to businesses that are emerging as some of the new industry sectors that are growing, and to go to them and say, well, what kind of people do you need? What kind of skills do they need? And we can take a group of people and train them as in a cohort to provide, let's say, instead of training one person and 15 different people going to 15 different schools, we can take 15 people, put them in the same class, and then they're ready to go to work for that employer. So that's the first thing we're going to do. The second thing I think is that we also have to look at whether or not a person does need training, because there are individuals who have transferable skills that you can look at and say, okay, well, you were a night auditor at a hotel and you did a lot of customer service. Maybe you can work at a hospital now, working, enrolling people and working in their admissions office or working in their business office. So there are definitely opportunities for people to take their skills and transfer them. And again, that's not to minimize saying that people don't need upskilling, because they do. There are individuals who don't maybe have the necessary skills that they need to respond to the needs of today's labor market, which again is changing almost on a daily basis. So I think that there are a couple of different ways that we have to look from a workforce development standpoint to changing some of our strategies. And some of that has also been, the virtual learning platforms that we're now kind of, I want to say force fed, but are starting to become really a big part of the way we deliver services to our constituents.
Well, in terms of our job in transportation here, obviously, I know there's a massive shortage of truck drivers. That's because distribution centers are growing all over the place. There's also seems to be a greater emphasis on vocational type training.
Right.
The old carpentry skills that we all used to say was necessary so much, we kind of forgot over the years in some ways. And there's a need for that type of growth. So is your workforce development doing training in those type of programs at all, or that?
Absolutely. So we're always looking for opportunities. I'm probably one of the biggest proponents of vocational training that you can find, because number one, a plumber or an electrician really can't be replaced by automation. I mean, there's a certain aspect maybe of their jobs that technology can enhance, but you still need those individuals to perform those functions. An auto mechanic. Now, cars these days are much more computerized, so there's a technology component to that, and that might be a good example of someone who you could take who is a traditional mechanic and maybe needs to be upskilled to teach them some of the technology. But vocational training is very crucial. And so we work, quite closely with our VOTEC schools in the county, and also the county college as well, because there are hybrid programs where you can take somebody who can, learn various skills, practical skills, and then also concurrently work with receiving an associate's degree, or non-credit programs too. So some of those maybe are not, suited to meet the needs of today's labor market. So again, we're always looking at new opportunities and ideas of how we can further collaborate and make those connections both on the VOTEC side and the community college side.
Well, that goes along to Brian. Now, you're involved in higher education, Brian. You think the higher education institutions are also going to be looking into these type of programs for some of the different types of skills? I always talk about, I have a degree in history from college because back in those days, there was so much less of it. It was a lot easier, but it really wasn't a marketable skill that I could use when I got out of school. So Brian, do you think that the universities might look at types of, if nothing vocational in terms of carpentry, but let's say in terms of IT and those type of programs working with the computers?
Shifts in higher education are going to be really interesting to watch, especially right now where so many schools are remote. But even more so as these institutions are forced to think about their strategic position in a very crowded and cloudy marketplace. I think you're going to see a need to adopt some more emphasis on vocation, because that's where the market is going to be. it's also going to be the case, I think, that we're training people for jobs right now in higher education, and the question of whether the job, the traditional job, is going to exist in the same way that it existed in January, is one that still needs to be addressed. And so I think that as more people are moving into a gig economy, as more functions are skills based, you're going to start to see a need for colleges and universities to adjust what they teach and how they teach, so that it is more skills oriented, so that it is more vocational oriented. And I think you'll see some of that adjustment happening at the community college level first, but ultimately, when community colleges start to siphon more students away from traditional four-year institutions, which I think is probably in the outlook, you're going to start to see higher education changing in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I also think that that's an opportunity for the colleges, both community colleges and four-year institutions, to look at more work-based learning in conjunction with their programs. So and I know when you're talking about vocational training, you don't just mean the hands-on type of, plumbers and electricians and things like that, but also the fact that you need people to gain that experience. And I'll give you a perfect example. When I went to college back, I graduated in 1990, but I have a degree in communications, but the reason why I chose the program I did was because I had to do 3 internships and the practicum before I graduated. And I will tell you that the education that I received from those internships and practicums was so invaluable to me. And I probably got more out of that than I did out of the classroom portion of my degree. So I think that work-based learning has to be looked at more holistically by our educational institutions as well.
Yeah,
I
there's
think
so much
that's a key point.
emphasis in adult education on things like learning from experience, on things like self-direction, and yet when we look at what a college or university is offering, it typically has still been liberal arts focused, very focused on curricular areas that are designed to produce generalists.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you will start to see a shift away from that and towards more workplace focused learning.
Well, I think one of the other things that we are finding a shortage of is the STEM people, the science, technology, engineering, math. And I know from studies they've done, Middlesex County itself would have had a reduction in population if it wasn't for immigration. And I think that the higher level jobs we're talking about, those skills are immigration based more than anything right now in so many ways. So it's going to be a change in terms of the demographics also. I mean, not just the education part. So that's going to make it even more difficult, I think, competitively for these people who need to be retrained. If the employers are going to be hiring people who are already trained, it's going to be tougher. So, by the way, Kevin, is the one-stop center open again or not yet?
So no, so we're waiting for direction from the state of New Jersey on that. They're still not allowing in-person services, and so that does create somewhat of a challenge. But I will say this: if you would have asked me in January, February, could my staff do their jobs from home and from virtual settings, I would have told you there's no way. And we've actually pulled it off to the extent that I think we're almost a more efficient organization now because people are working virtually. We're still meeting with customers. We're doing virtual orientations. Really, all of our services are online. And so it's funny because we were already preparing to kind of take this model, to create this model anyway. Prior to COVID, we've been working with the Heldrich Center for Workforce Development on how we can make our services more accessible to county residents. And so, we always talked about, well, how do you offer services virtually? And again, here we are, we were forced into it, and we're finding that it's been working very well, and it gives opportunity to people who maybe can't walk into our one-stop centers or can't come here because maybe they're employed, but they need additional skills. They can now access our services from the comfort of their own home.
And in terms of education, I mean, you have a whole generation of people coming out of in-school learning virtually, out of school virtual learning. So it's going to, the skills that are going to be there don't have to be trained that way in order to have virtual learning. I'll talk from a Keep Middlesex Moving point of view. We always had a mixture of telework and back in the office work. So we had a mixture. I don't think there's been any loss of productivity at all. It might be an increase.
Right,
So
I would agree.
It's possible to do it. It's possible. I personally don't like it, but that's just me.
Yeah.
But I'm getting used to it. Let's put it that way. I'll never get used to wearing a mask, but that's an interesting.
There was a really interesting study that came out of the University of Chicago looking at the number of hours of gained productivity from telecommuting, and it's I have it written down here. It's 9 billion hours a year in over the last 7 months of gained hours of productivity across the United States. Now, not all of that has been dedicated back to work. About
Right.
35% of it ends up being work. But it's just an interesting statistic when we start to think about whether there is a loss of productivity. There is a different skill set that's required, not just from employees, but from managers. And that's another thing that's going to need to be upskilled, is how do you, as a manager or a leader of an organization, think about how to manage a remote work staff? From two different perspectives. How do you manage productivity, which I think is what everybody is focused on right now, and in higher education and an education sector in total, I think we're really focused on how do we make sure that the classroom experience is replicated effectively online. But there's also the social and emotional health of employees, a growing recognition from folks that they rely on the organization as a social support, and a need for employers to think about how they're going to continue to offer that if more work is going to be done in a virtual context or in a mixed context.
Yeah,
Well, I think that's why I said I've gone from baby boomer to geezer zoomer. Okay, but I do think there's going to be a certain Zoom fatigue that's coming in.
Absolutely.
Our little office we managed to maintain cohesiveness by having regular staff meetings and talking through different media, but at the same time, it's not there the same way it was before. And I think you're absolutely right. That's going to be the emotional part, the connection part, because we all know the dirty little secret that a work day in the office wasn't completely work productivity anyway.
Right.
We all know there's things that we had to do with the social stuff to keep track of each other's personal life, not just our work life. And I think those are changes we're going to be facing in the workforce itself. We just can't do everything virtually because it's not virtual. I also think, Brian, from your point of view with the education system that we're facing, there's also the economic situation with higher education. They have to make these changes because the students are not there. I mean, they're just not getting some of the numbers they used to have. And the revenue produced by room and board isn't there either.
Yeah.
But I know there's somebody said one time that MIT has something like 4 million people take one of their math classes. Obviously they're never in Boston or
Right.
Cambridge, but they're taking courses that way. So I think there's going to be changes in terms of training virtually that way, and that we haven't seen as much as we're going to see.
Yeah, so I mean, that's part of this larger connectivist movement, this the MOOCware, massive online open course, where institutions are focused on serving up their content that can then be accessible to anybody, anywhere. You don't earn a full degree for that. You earn at some sort of alternate credential, which is itself, I think, valuable in the workplace context that we're moving towards. One thing, though, that I think we might start to see, Kevin was reminding me of this when you were talking about the fact that your organization had already started to make the shift to a virtual context before the pandemic hit. I think organizations that have previously been thinking about that were better positioned when everything started to make the clean shift over and then start focusing on strategy and thinking about where they fit within a broader context of services. Higher education, I think, is going to be the same thing, where if organizations remain focused exclusively on serving up content, then there's going to be a cap on how much they can offer, because there are so many different sources that folks could go to, and I think you'll start to see people relying more on those other credentials and those other services. If institutions of higher education are more focused on thinking about the development of the student, thinking about themselves as a space for social development and professional development, then they may come out of this in a better economic position. So those institutions that are focused on content exclusively, I think, are going to struggle. But those that are focused on content as a part of a broader area of a broader catalog of services, I think will end up succeeding.
Well, one of the challenges at KMM is logistically how we do some of our programs. One of our fairly successful programs has been teaching kids how to walk to school safely, our Safe Routes to School program. Obviously, the coordinator of that, he can't get into the schools right now, okay? We don't know how long it's going to be before this. So he very creatively has created videos about different types of safety programs, but it's going to reach a point where the content it's either repetitive or unnecessary. So we have to make sure he stays active, and he is very active now. But in the long term, I don't know what we do in terms of getting back into the school systems, how we get back into the workforce that we did before. So it's a challenge. But I think you're right. We were prepared, at least technologically, to have our workforce come home. Our computers can be at home and connect everything we do at work. Kevin, in Middlesex County is going to try to be the innovative capital of New Jersey. Okay,
Right.
that's the goal with technology and those type of growth. Do you see that the county itself is making the steps in the right direction to move more toward a 21st century type technology and economic outlook?
Oh, absolutely. And again, I think it goes back to, this is something that the county was looking at prior to COVID. As you know, the county is working on its master plan, Destination 2040. And one of the areas for economic development and one of the industries that we're looking to attract here is autonomous vehicles. And so that plays into transportation, right? And so that was something that we looked at prior to COVID. And that continues. You know, we're looking at developing, the county's looking at developing a project which would, and Bill, you might be familiar with this, autonomous shuttles within downtown New Brunswick that would be able to move people throughout the city and probably points beyond. And so those types of initiatives are still continue. And you know, having worked in government for most of my career, not all in Middlesex County, I would say that I enjoy the innovative nature of how our organization has been shaped. I mean, in terms of looking at ideas and things, not only transportation, but even from, for example, workforce development. We're doing a lot of things in workforce development that have been touted as best practices nationally. You know, I think innovation is synonymous with Middlesex County government right now. And again, I don't, you know, I might be a little partial, but it's definitely something that makes my job more enjoyable, because it's about putting pieces of the puzzle that typically maybe you wouldn't always think fit together. But for example, the department where my office resides in, you know, Department of Business Innovations, Education Opportunity, we have a mix of offices from workforce development through arts, the Arts Institute. We have agriculture through Rutgers Cooperative Extension. When economic drivers for this area and for the region. So a lot of things that have been done and proposed in the last several years, including the marketing that the county's done, really speaks to our vision for moving forward and looking ahead, not just addressing today's needs, but addressing the needs of the future as well.
And not to mention the newest Department of Transportation.
Correct.
Well, I think we've opened up for questions right now. Christina, do we have any questions that we need to answer that I hadn't asked?
We have one question that has come in, and then we could wrap it up after the question. It's how do you think the post-COVID workforce will affect our real estate?
Well, so it's funny because I was just thinking about that. So I think one of the ways that it's going to affect it is the commercial real estate. You may see companies downsizing their footprints in terms of office space, and so there might be the opportunity for some space to become available that might be used for things like warehouses, where now they have to have more space because they're socially distant. So I think there might be a drop off initially in some of the commercial real estate, but then you're going to see other emerging industries pick that space up. The other way, from a residential standpoint, in terms of housing, I think you're going to see people looking, when they look for homes, there's going to be more of an emphasis now on space for home offices and whether or not, you know, you have broadband connectivity and things like that, so that people will be able to work from home. So I think there's some impacts that you're going to see immediately with real estate, and then some that may be longer term that we probably just can't speculate on at this point.
Brian, do you have any forecast about economic development through real estate?
I don't know. No, my face was that I was hoping that wasn't a question for me, because I don't know.
Yeah, right.
The answer was great.
But again, I think, you know, what's interesting is that, and again, it's maybe not relevant to real estate, but I really haven't seen a drop off of businesses requesting people and looking for help. So while there have been some, businesses that have closed down or laid people off, there's still a lot of businesses out there looking to fill positions. So that's why I think there's going to be a shift in real estate, probably from the offices more into industrial space. And you're going to see the increase probably in, logistics and distribution and some of those centers that we play or call home here in Middlesex County, especially over in South Brunswick and Dayton in those areas.
Well, I always.
Can I say one thing? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that just to Kevin's point, I think that the traditional model that organizations have taken of there's an economic downturn, let's downsize, is not what we're going to be seeing here. I think instead it is we don't know what's going to happen. How can we be more agile model? And so I think that's what's preventing some of the bottom falling out, is that
Right.
people, they don't want to downsize. They just want to be able to change the way that people do work so that we can be more flexible if this lasts for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. We just don't know.
Right.
Well, in terms of flexibility in the transportation world, we have spent 30 plus years in KMM trying to figure out how to get people to the goods and services. I think we've learned a whole lot now that goods and services have come to the people. It's going to change the way we look at transportation and movement of goods, services, and people. I mean, telemedicine is just one of the examples, not to mention grocery stores. So I want to thank Dr. Dashew and I want to thank Kevin Kurdziel for joining us. I think this has been very informative. We all have a cloudy crystal ball right now, but
Right.
this is something these people are going to be looking into it, trying to find out what's going to happen in the future. I want to thank Christina Fowler for once again putting together this program for us. I want to thank the participants for joining us, and also at the same time, want to encourage everyone to look at kmm.org to see the types of programs we have coming up in the near future. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Have a great day, everyone.
You too. Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.